The moment you realize you're an empath, it doesn't feel like a gift, at least not for long. At first, it feels like sensitivity, like depth, like an ability to understand people on a level others can't reach. You feel emotions intensely, you notice shifts in energy, you sense what others are feeling even when they say nothing. People may even praise you for it, calling you kind, understanding, emotionally intelligent. But slowly, quietly, you begin to understand the truth no one talks about. Being an empath doesn't just mean feeling deeply, it means feeling too much, often at your own expense. As an empath, you don't simply experience your own emotions, you absorb the emotions of everyone around you. A tense room weighs on your chest. Someone else's sadness lingers inside you long after you've left them. Anger that isn't yours still unsettles your nervous system. You walk into spaces and instantly feel heavy without knowing why. It's like your emotional boundaries are thin, almost non-existent, and the world keeps pressing against them. You feel things before you understand them, before logic steps in, before words exist. Your body reacts first. Your mood shifts without warning. You carry emotional echoes that don't belong to you, and yet you can't tell where they came from. This makes daily life exhausting. Simple interactions drain you. Crowds overwhelm you. Even silence can feel loud if the emotional energy around you is unsettled. Being an empath means you notice what others miss. The forced smile, the fake laugh, the tension behind someone's calm voice. You sense pain people try to hide, and once you sense it, you can't ignore it. You feel compelled to understand it, to comfort it, to fix it. You don't choose this reaction, it happens automatically. Someone else's suffering pulls at you like a responsibility you never agreed to carry. And that's where it starts to suck, because caring this deeply comes with a cost. You give emotional support even when you're running on empty. You listen even when you need to be heard. You stay present for others while quietly abandoning yourself. You tell yourself it's empathy, that it's kindness, that it's who you are. But over time, you realize how unbalanced it feels, how much you give compared to how little you receive. As an empath, you often attract people who need healing, people with heavy emotional baggage, people who are lost, broken, confused, or draining, not because you want to, but because your energy feels safe to them. They sense your understanding, your patience, your willingness to listen. And while you genuinely want to help, you slowly become a container for other people's pain. Their trauma becomes something you carry, even when they move on. You start to feel tired in a way sleep doesn't fix. Not physical exhaustion, but emotional fatigue. A deep weariness that settles into your bones. You wake up already overwhelmed, already feeling too much. And the worst part is that you often don't feel justified in your exhaustion because you tell yourself, it's not my pain, why am I this tired? Empaths struggle with boundaries because boundaries feel cruel. Saying no feels like rejection, walking away feels like abandonment, protecting your energy feels selfish. So you stay longer than you should. You tolerate more than you can handle. You keep explaining, forgiving, understanding, even when it's hurting you. You convince yourself that being strong means enduring, not realizing that endurance without limits slowly destroys you. You also feel things long after others have moved on. Arguments replay in your head. Harsh words echo inside you. Emotional moments stick to you like residue. While others forget, you remember. While others detach, you absorb. This makes it hard to let go, hard to forgive yourself, hard to move forward without carrying emotional weight from the past. Being an empath also means you're painfully aware of emotional imbalance. You notice when effort isn't mutual, when care isn't returned, when you're giving more than the other person is willing to offer. And yet, instead of leaving, you often stay and try harder. You explain their behavior to yourself. You empathize with their flaws. You see their wounds instead of their actions. And in doing so, you minimize your own pain. You might even feel guilty for feeling hurt, guilty for needing space, guilty for being overwhelmed. You tell yourself others have it worse. You rationalize your suffering instead of honoring it. You become compassionate to everyone except yourself. As an empath, conflict feels unbearable. Raised voices, tension, emotional distance, it all affects you deeply. You'd rather absorb discomfort than cause it, so you keep the peace at your own expense. You stay silent when you should speak. You suppress your needs to avoid upsetting others. Over time, you lose touch with what you actually want because you've trained yourself to prioritize emotional harmony over honesty. Relationships are especially complicated for empaths. Love doesn't feel light. It feels intense, consuming, deeply emotional. You feel your partner's moods as if they're your own. You sense shifts before they're spoken. You anticipate emotional changes and prepare yourself for them. Instead of enjoying connection, you often brace for pain. You give love fully, but you rarely feel safe enough to receive it without fear. You also attract people who don't know how to love gently, people who take without realizing how much they're taking, people who lean on your empathy without offering emotional support in return. And because you understand their pain, you excuse behavior that hurts you. You stay in situations longer than you should, believing your understanding will eventually heal things. There's also a quiet loneliness that comes with being an empath, not because you're alone, but because you feel unseen. People appreciate what you do for them, but they rarely understand what it costs you. They see your calm exterior, not the emotional storms you carry inside. They assume you're strong because you're gentle. They don't realize how fragile you feel beneath your empathy. You might even start resenting your own sensitivity, wishing you were tougher, wishing you cared less, wishing you could shut it off like others seem to do so easily. You don't want to lose compassion, you just want relief. Relief from feeling everything so deeply all the time. Being an empath also means you're highly self-aware emotionally. You analyze your reactions, you question your feelings, you wonder if you're being too sensitive or if your pain is valid. You internalize emotional experiences instead of expressing them freely. This creates confusion and self-doubt. You start asking yourself whether empathy is a strength or a flaw. And yet, despite how much it hurts, you keep being kind, you keep understanding, you keep caring, because empathy isn't something you can turn off. It's woven into how you experience the world. It shapes how you love, how you connect, how you exist. And learning how to live with it without letting it consume you becomes one of the hardest challenges you face. For now, it sucks. It sucks to feel so deeply in a world that often feels emotionally careless. It sucks to carry invisible weight while others move freely. It sucks to be an empath when all you want is peace inside your own mind and heart. You begin to notice that being an empath doesn't just affect how you feel, it shapes how you see the world. You start scanning emotional environments automatically, the way others scan for physical danger. You read faces, tones, pauses, and energy without trying. It's not a skill you turn on, it's always running in the background. And because of that, your nervous system rarely feels safe enough to fully relax. You realize that you live in a constant state of emotional alertness. Even during good moments, part of you is checking for shifts. You sense when joy might fade, when tension might rise, when something feels slightly off. This makes it hard to stay present. You're always half bracing for emotional impact, half preparing yourself to respond to someone else's needs. Rest becomes shallow because your awareness never fully sleeps. As an empath, you often feel responsible for emotional outcomes. If someone is uncomfortable, you feel it's your fault. If a conversation goes quiet, you wonder what you did wrong. If someone is upset, you immediately look inward instead of outward. You assume you should have noticed sooner, done more, been gentler, been different. Other people's emotions feel like something you're supposed to manage, even when they have nothing to do with you. This creates a deep sense of emotional guilt. You feel guilty for pulling away, guilty for needing space, guilty for not replying fast enough, guilty for choosing yourself when someone else is struggling. You convince yourself that your needs can wait, that someone else's pain is more urgent. And slowly, you train yourself to disappear emotionally, to exist primarily as support instead of as a whole person. You also become aware of how much you suppress. You feel anger, but you soften it. You feel hurt, but you explain it away. You feel resentment, but you bury it under understanding. You don't want to be unfair. You don't want to overreact. You don't want to cause pain. So you swallow emotions that deserve to be expressed, and they settle quietly inside you, building weight over time. There's a particular kind of sadness that comes from realizing how rarely people ask how you're really doing. They come to you for comfort, for advice, for emotional safety, but few pause to hold space for you in the same way. And even when they ask, you hesitate to answer honestly. You don't want to burden them. You don't want to shift the focus. You've learned to be strong by being silent. Being an empath often means you understand people who don't understand you. You see their wounds, their defenses, their fears. You know why they act the way they do. And that understanding makes it hard to walk away, even when you're being hurt. You tell yourself they don't mean it. You see their pain instead of their impact. You forgive before you're ready. You stay because you know their story, even when your own story is being neglected. Over time, this creates confusion about love. You start associating love with emotional labor, with sacrifice, with endurance. You believe that loving deeply means hurting quietly, that caring means absorbing pain without complaint. And because of that, relationships begin to feel heavy instead of nourishing. You give and give, hoping one day it will feel balanced, but often it never does. You might notice how drained you feel after social interactions, even pleasant ones. It's not that you dislike people, it's that you feel them too intensely. You process not just what was said, but what was felt. You leave conversations carrying emotional residue that wasn't yours to begin with, and you don't know how to put it down. There's also frustration that comes from being told you're too sensitive, as if sensitivity is a flaw, as if feeling deeply is something you should fix. You try to toughen up, to care less, to detach, but it never really works. Suppressing empathy doesn't make you stronger, it just makes you numb and exhausted. You weren't built to shut down, you were built to feel. And yet feeling this much in a world that often avoids emotion can feel isolating. You watch people move on quickly, forget easily, detach cleanly. You wonder how they do it. You wonder why the same moments stay with you for weeks, months, even years. You start questioning whether something is wrong with you, when in reality, you're just wired differently. Being an empath means you carry invisible wounds, wounds from caring too much, from staying too long, from listening without being heard, from loving people who didn't know how to love you back gently. These wounds aren't dramatic, but they're deep. They show up as exhaustion, anxiety, emotional withdrawal, and a quiet longing to feel safe inside your own heart. Eventually, you reach a point where something has to change, not because you stop being an empath, but because you can't survive without learning how to protect yourself. You begin to realize that empathy without boundaries isn't kindness, it's self-abandonment. That understanding others doesn't mean excusing harm, that compassion also has to include you. This realization doesn't come easily, it feels unnatural at first. Saying no feels wrong, stepping back feels selfish, choosing distance feels cold, but slowly you notice something shift. You feel lighter, you feel clearer. You realize that protecting your energy doesn't make you less caring, it makes your care sustainable. You learn that it's not your job to heal everyone, that you can feel compassion without carrying pain, that you can be kind without being consumed. Being an empath doesn't mean sacrificing yourself, it means understanding emotions, including your own. And maybe that's the part no one teaches you, that empathy needs balance, that sensitivity needs safety, that caring deeply doesn't mean losing yourself in the process. Because yes, it sucks to be an empath in many ways. It's exhausting, it's overwhelming, it's lonely, but it doesn't have to destroy you. When you learn to pair empathy with boundaries, awareness with rest, and compassion with self-respect, something changes. You don't stop feeling deeply. You just stop bleeding quietly for everyone. Being an empath means you don't just notice pain, you absorb it. You walk into a room and before anyone speaks, your body already knows who is tired, who is angry, who is hiding sadness behind a smile. You don't choose to feel these things, they arrive inside you automatically, like a second heartbeat that doesn't belong to you. While others experience emotions as passing events, you experience them as environments. You live inside emotional weather that keeps changing, even when your own life is calm. The hardest part is that most people don't even realize what they're giving you. They vent, complain, unload, confess, and walk away lighter, while you stay behind holding emotions that were never yours to carry. An empath becomes an emotional landfill without meaning to. You listen because you care. You stay present because you feel responsible. And slowly, quietly, your own emotional space disappears. You forget what you feel because you are too busy managing what everyone else feels. This is where the exhaustion begins. Not physical exhaustion, but something deeper, a soul-level fatigue. You can sleep for 8 hours and still wake up drained. You can take breaks and still feel heavy, because what tires you isn't activity, it's emotional exposure. Every interaction costs you something, every conversation leaves residue, and unlike others, you can't just shake it off. Emotions stick to you, they echo, they replay, They settle into your nervous system and refuse to leave. Over time, this sensitivity changes the way you move through the world. You become hyper-alert, you scan faces, you read tones, you anticipate moods before they arrive, not because you want to, but because you've learned that if you don't, you'll be overwhelmed. You learn to predict emotional shifts the way sailors read the sky before a storm, but living like this means you're never fully relaxed. Even in peaceful moments, a part of you is on guard, waiting for the next emotional wave to hit. And then there is guilt, the constant, quiet guilt. You feel guilty for pulling away, guilty for needing space, guilty for saying no, guilty for not answering messages fast enough, guilty for choosing yourself, even when choosing yourself feels like survival. Empaths are often mistaken for being endlessly patient, endlessly available, endlessly strong. But the truth is, every boundary feels like a betrayal. You were taught, directly or indirectly, that your worth comes from how much you can carry for others. This is why being an empath often leads to emotional isolation. Not because you don't love people, but because people exhaust you. You crave connection, yet fear it at the same time. You want closeness, but closeness means exposure. It means absorbing emotions that can destabilize you. So you start withdrawing quietly. You cancel plans. You stay silent. You disappear not because you don't care, but because caring costs too much. What makes it worse is that people rarely see your struggle. From the outside, you look calm, understanding, grounded. You're the one others lean on, the one who listens, the one who gets it. No one checks on the listener. No one asks the strong one how they're holding up. And even when they do, you struggle to answer honestly because you don't want to burden anyone with what you already know is heavy. Empaths also struggle with anger in a strange way. You feel it deeply, but you suppress it quickly. Anger feels dangerous to you not because it's wrong, but because you feel how it affects others. You sense the emotional impact of your words before you speak them, so you swallow your frustration to keep the peace. Over time, that anger doesn't disappear. It turns inward. It becomes self-blame, self-doubt, self-silencing. You become angry at yourself for feeling too much, needing too much, being too sensitive. This is how empathy slowly turns into self-erasure. You adapt so well to others that you lose contact with your own emotional center. You forget what you like. You forget what you want. You forget what feels good to you. Your inner world becomes a crowded room where everyone else's feelings are loud and your own voice is barely audible. And the more you lose yourself, the harder it becomes to explain what's wrong, because nothing obvious is broken. Being an empath also means you see truths others avoid. You notice emotional undercurrents, unspoken tensions, quiet sadness behind confident faces. You see when relationships are one-sided. You sense when love is fading before words are spoken. This awareness can feel like a curse. You can't enjoy illusions. You can't stay comfortable in denial. You feel reality too clearly, too early, and too deeply. And knowing doesn't always give you power, sometimes it just gives you pain. Eventually, many empaths reach a breaking point. Not a dramatic collapse, but a quiet shutdown. You stop feeling as much. You numb yourself slightly just to function. You become distant, even cold, not because you've changed, but because you're protecting what's left of yourself. And then people say you've become different. They don't realize that this version of you is the result of carrying too much for too long without relief. What truly sucks about being an empath is not the sensitivity itself. It's living in a world that doesn't protect sensitive people, a world that rewards emotional hardness, speed, and self-interest, a world where empathy is praised in words but exploited in action. You are expected to understand everyone, while no one takes the time to understand you. And yet, despite all of this, empaths rarely stop caring. Even after being drained, misunderstood, and overlooked, your heart remains open. That's both your strength and your burden. Because deep down, you don't want to stop feeling, you just want the world to feel safer for people like you. Being an empath sucks because you feel everything in a world that feels too little. You carry emotional truths others drop. You absorb pain others avoid. And you keep going, quietly, hoping one day your sensitivity won't feel like a weakness, but like something that finally has room to breathe. Being an empath means you don't just hear what people say, you feel what they hide. You sense the tension before words form, the sadness behind a smile, the anger buried under politeness. Your nervous system is always slightly ahead of the moment, reading emotional weather that others walk through unaware. And while this sensitivity can look like a gift from the outside. Living inside it feels heavy. It feels like carrying invisible weight that no one else sees and no one else offers to help you put down. You don't get the luxury of emotional distance. Other people can shrug things off, forget uncomfortable moments, or move on without looking back. You can't. Conversations stay with you long after they end. A careless tone, a subtle shift in energy, a look that lasted half a second too long, all of it echoes in your mind. You replay it, not because you want to, but because your system is wired to search for meaning. You're always trying to understand what you felt and why you felt it so deeply. This is where exhaustion begins, not physical tiredness, but emotional fatigue, the kind that sleep doesn't fix. You wake up already carrying traces of other people's emotions from yesterday, stress that wasn't yours, sadness you absorbed without realizing it, guilt for things you didn't cause. Empaths often feel drained without knowing why, because the act of feeling itself has been constant. There was no off switch, no moment of rest from emotional input. You learn early on that your feelings are too much, too sensitive, too intense, too dramatic, so you start minimizing yourself. You stop talking about what you feel because it seems easier than explaining why it affects you so deeply. You become the listener, the supporter, the one who understands everyone else, while quietly feeling misunderstood yourself. People come to you with their pain, but rarely ask about yours. Not because they don't care, but because you've become so good at holding space that they forget you also need it. Over time, you develop hyper-awareness. You can feel when someone is pulling away before they admit it. You sense resentment before it turns into conflict. You notice emotional shifts that others don't even recognize in themselves yet. And while this awareness can help you avoid danger, it also keeps you in a constant state of alertness. You're always scanning, always adjusting, always preparing for emotional impact. Peace becomes rare, because peace requires not anticipating the next emotional wave. Being an empath also means you struggle with boundaries, not because you don't understand them, but because enforcing them feels like hurting someone. Saying no feels like rejection, stepping back feels like abandonment. So you overextend, you stay longer than you should, you give more than you have. You tolerate emotional environments that drain you because you can feel how much others need you. And slowly, almost invisibly, you disappear behind the role of being the strong one. What hurts most is that people often misunderstand your silence. When you withdraw, it's not because you don't care, it's because you care too much. You need space to process what you've absorbed. You need quiet to return to yourself. But from the outside, it can look like distance, coldness, or disinterest. And explaining your inner world feels exhausting because words never fully capture how overwhelming it is to feel everything at once. As time passes, you may begin to resent your own empathy. You wish you could turn it down, numb it, escape it. You watch people who seem emotionally untouched and wonder what it would be like to live that lightly, to not feel responsible for everyone's emotional state, to not carry the weight of unspoken pain. This resentment can turn inward, making you feel broken for being the way you are, even though your sensitivity was never a flaw to begin with. Yet despite all this, you keep feeling, you keep caring, you keep absorbing the world as it is, raw and unfiltered, because being an empath isn't something you can simply stop. It's how you're wired. The challenge isn't learning to feel less, it's learning how to protect yourself while feeling deeply, how to honor your sensitivity without letting it consume you, how to remember that understanding others does not mean sacrificing yourself. And that realization doesn't come easily. It comes slowly, through exhaustion, through disappointment, through moments where you finally choose yourself and feel guilty for it. But each time you do, you reclaim a small part of your energy, a small piece of your identity that isn't defined by what you give, but by who you are when you're not carrying everyone else's emotions. Being an empath sucks not because empathy is bad, but because the world isn't designed for people who feel this deeply. And learning to live in that world without losing yourself is the hardest emotional skill you'll ever have to master. Slowly, you start to notice a pattern in your life. The people who are drawn to you are often the ones who are hurting the most. They sense your openness, your ability to understand without judgment, your willingness to sit with discomfort. And at first, that feels meaningful. It feels like purpose, like your sensitivity exists for a reason. But over time, you realize that many of these connections are one-sided. They take comfort from you, but they don't know how to give it back in the same way. You become a safe place for others while never fully feeling safe yourself. You also begin to notice how often you excuse behavior that hurts you. You understand why people act the way they do. You see their wounds, their fears, their unresolved pain. And because you see it, you forgive too quickly. You rationalize disrespect. You tolerate emotional neglect. You tell yourself that if you were just more patient, more understanding, more loving, things would change. But understanding someone's pain doesn't make their actions hurt less. And empathy doesn't protect you from being damaged by what you allow. Conflict feels especially difficult for you, not because you're afraid of speaking up, but because you feel everything that comes with confrontation all at once. Your emotions, their emotions, the tension in the air, the potential fallout. Your body reacts before your mind can catch up. Your heart races, your thoughts scatter, and suddenly the simplest conversation feels overwhelming. So you delay, you stay quiet. You carry things inside until they turn into heaviness, resentment, or emotional numbness. There are moments when you wish you could be colder, less affected, more detached. You try to build emotional armor, but it never fits right. Even when you pretend not to care, you still feel everything underneath. The difference is that now you're also carrying the pressure of hiding it, and that kind of internal conflict creates loneliness, because no one sees the real weight you're holding. They only see what you allow them to see. Being an empath also means you're deeply affected by the state of the world. News, suffering, injustice, it doesn't stay abstract for you. It becomes personal. You imagine the faces behind the stories. You feel the fear, the grief, the anger as if it were happening to someone you know. Sometimes it feels irresponsible to look away, but staying aware costs you peace. You're caught between caring too much and protecting yourself from being overwhelmed by things you can't control. At some point, burnout becomes unavoidable. You feel disconnected, not because you've stopped caring, but because you've cared without rest for too long. Your emotions go quiet, not as healing, but as defense. And that scares you, because feeling deeply has always been part of your identity. When it fades, even temporarily, you don't know who you are without it. You're left wondering whether empathy is a gift, a curse, or both. What no one tells you is that learning to live as an empath isn't about hardening your heart. It's about directing your empathy inward, about realizing that your feelings deserve the same respect you give to everyone else's, that your exhaustion is valid, that your need for space isn't selfish, and that protecting your energy doesn't make you cruel, it makes you sustainable. You begin to understand that not every emotion you feel belongs to you, that not every pain you sense is yours to fix. This realization is uncomfortable at first. Letting go feels like neglect. Choosing yourself feels wrong. But slowly, you notice something change. You feel lighter, clearer, more present. Your empathy doesn't disappear, it becomes more intentional, more balanced, more rooted in self-respect. Being an empath will probably always come with challenges. You will always feel deeply. You will always notice what others miss. You will always care in a world that often rewards indifference. And yes, sometimes that will suck. Sometimes it will hurt in ways that are hard to explain. But when you learn to stand with yourself instead of abandoning yourself for others, empathy stops being something that drains you and starts becoming something that defines you without destroying you. And that's the part no one talks about. Not the suffering, but the strength it takes to feel this deeply and still choose to stay open in a world that doesn't always handle softness gently. And even when you start learning these boundaries, the guilt doesn't disappear overnight. You still feel a subtle ache when you don't respond immediately, when you say no, when you choose rest over being available. Part of you worries that you're becoming selfish, colder, less caring. But that's just the old habit talking, the belief that your worth is tied to how much emotional weight you can carry for others. Unlearning that takes time, and it's uncomfortable because it forces you to sit with yourself instead of constantly tuning into everyone else. You realize how rarely you ask yourself simple questions. How do I feel right now? What do I need? Am I okay? For most of your life, your attention has flowed outward automatically. You've been reading rooms, sensing moods, adjusting your tone, softening your edges so others could feel at ease. Turning that awareness inward feels strange at first, almost unnatural. But slowly, it becomes grounding. You begin to notice your own tension before it turns into exhaustion. Your own sadness before it hardens into numbness. There's also grief that comes with this awareness. Grief for the version of you that gave endlessly without protection. Grief for the times you stayed too long, listened too deeply, loved too quietly, hoping someone would finally notice how much you were carrying. You don't judge that version of yourself, you understand why they did what they did. They were trying to survive, to connect, to matter. But you also know now that empathy without limits doesn't make you noble. It makes you invisible to yourself. As you grow, your relationships begin to change. Some people drift away when you stop overgiving. Others push back, confused by the version of you that no longer absorbs everything without complaint. And that hurts. It confirms one of your deepest fears, that your value was tied to how much you could emotionally provide. But it also creates space. Space for relationships that don't require self-erasure. Space for people who don't just take comfort from you, but offer it back. You start to understand that empathy is not about rescuing, it's about connection. And connection requires two people showing up honestly, not one person carrying the emotional load for both. When you stop trying to save everyone, you finally have room to breathe. Your nervous system begins to settle. Your mind feels quieter, not empty, just less crowded with emotions that were never yours to hold in the first place. There will still be days when it feels heavy, when the world feels too loud, too cruel, too overwhelming, days when you absorb things without meaning to, when you go home feeling drained and unsure why. Being an empath doesn't switch off, but now you recognize those moments sooner. You treat them as signals instead of failures. You rest instead of pushing. You protect instead of apologizing. And slowly, something shifts at the core of you. You stop seeing your sensitivity as a weakness you need to justify. You see it as a depth that deserves care. You realize that empathy is powerful, but only when it's paired with self-respect. Only when it's grounded. Only when it flows both ways. It may always suck sometimes to be an empath, to feel more, notice more, carry more, but it doesn't have to cost you yourself. And when you finally learn that, when you choose to stand with your own emotions as faithfully as you've stood with everyone else's, empathy stops being a burden you endure and becomes a strength you live with on your own terms. And in the quiet moments, when you're finally alone with your thoughts, you start to notice something unexpected. Beneath the exhaustion, beneath the emotional noise you've carried for years, there is a calm that was always waiting for you. It doesn't arrive dramatically. It doesn't feel like a breakthrough. It feels small, almost fragile, but it's real. It's the feeling of not having to absorb everything, of letting emotions pass through you instead of settling inside you. You begin to trust yourself more, not in the sense of becoming fearless or unbothered, but in knowing that you can feel deeply without drowning in it. You learn that you don't have to understand everyone to validate yourself, that it's okay if some people never fully get you. Your job is no longer to translate your pain into something palatable for others. Your job is to honor it, quietly, honestly, without apology. There's a subtle power in that shift. You speak less when words would drain you, and more when something truly matters. You stop explaining your boundaries like they're temporary inconveniences. You stop shrinking your needs to keep the peace. And while this doesn't make life easier in every way, it makes it truer, lighter, more aligned with who you actually are instead of who you learn to be for survival. You still care deeply, that never leaves, but now your care has shape, it has limits, it has direction. You choose where your energy goes instead of letting it be taken, and that choice changes everything. It turns empathy from something that consumes you into something that supports you, something that connects rather than depletes. Being an empath in a world that often rewards emotional distance will probably always feel like swimming against the current. There will be moments when you wish you could be different, less sensitive, less aware, less affected, but there will also be moments of profound clarity, connection, and understanding that others may never experience in the same way. Moments that remind you why your depth matters. And maybe that's the quiet truth behind it all. It doesn't just suck to be an empath. It challenges you. It stretches you. It forces you to learn lessons about boundaries, self-worth, and emotional responsibility earlier and more intensely than most. But when you stop abandoning yourself in the process, when you finally learn to hold your own heart with the same care you offer the world, being an empath stops feeling like a flaw you have to survive, and starts feeling like a strength you've learned to carry wisely.